In November 2025, Mumbai looked like it always does during festival season. Loud, bright, restless, and strangely beautiful. Neon signs blinked over narrow streets, fireworks tore quick wounds of color into the humid sky, and the smell of incense mixed with diesel and street food in a way that only this city could produce. In the eastern suburb of Chembur, at the edge of a crowded market, a hilltop temple stood like a stone witness to all of it. Devotees climbed its worn steps every day to honor a fierce Hindu goddess whose image had watched over the neighborhood for generations. Off to one side of the main shrine, half in shadow, there was something that did not appear in any of the old plans of the temple: a white statue of the Virgin Mary. Years earlier, Catholic workers from a nearby parish had donated it after surviving a building collapse on the same hill, convinced that the Mother of Jesus had protected them. Out of respect, and perhaps curiosity, the temple committee had accepted the gift and placed it in a small recessed alcove near the entrance, close enough to be noticed, far enough not to compete with the main deity. On quiet mornings, a few Catholic women would stop here on their way to Mass, touch the base of the statue, and whisper a quick Hail Mary before heading down the hill. Hindu parents sometimes set marigolds at Mary's feet when exams or hospital visits weighed on their minds. Taxi drivers, Muslim and Hindu alike, had been known to nod at the alcove as they passed. For years, the statue was simply there, a silent sign that in a city of many gods and many fears, some people still believed there was room for more than one way to reach heaven. But 2025 was not a quiet year. Across India, stories of vandalized statues, angry protests, and wounded religious pride filled news feeds almost every week. Comment sections burned hotter than incense. People scrolled late into the night, breathing in outrage the way they used to breathe in monsoon air. Every story about the other side seemed to make the walls around each heart a little thicker. In this atmosphere, the little statue at the Chembur temple stopped being invisible. Some began to ask why a Christian image stood inside a Hindu complex. Others defended it as proof that this neighborhood was different, that Mumbai could still hold contradictions without exploding. The arguments did not stay online for long. They bled into whispered conversations behind market stalls, into tense meetings among temple leaders, into sermons in both churches and manders. On the evening of November 24th, the temple readied itself for a special night of lamps. Volunteers swept the courtyard and strung fresh garlands. Children ran between the pillars with sparklers, scattering sparks over stone that had seen more prayers than any of them could count. Loudspeakers crackled as devotional music filled the air. At the back of the courtyard, the Virgin statue received its own small attention. Someone washed off the dust of the past months, someone else placed a thin white candle in front of her, and a single red rose leaned against the base. Amid all this movement walked a man whose thoughts did not match the songs playing overhead. Ramesh had been a priest at this temple for years. He had grown up among its rituals, learned to light its sacred fire, memorized its chants until he could recite them in his sleep. Once, he had been proud that Christians and Hindus could stand side by side here without shouting. This year, that pride had slowly hardened into suspicion. He had read too many headlines about conversions and insults, watched too many short clips where sacred images were treated like props. Each new story, real or distorted, dug deeper into him. In the light of the phone screen, late at night, he saw people who looked like his neighbors celebrating when a cross replaced a trident or when a church grew where a shrine had once stood. Little by little, he began to see the statue of Mary not as a thank you from grateful workers, but as a wedge, a symbol of intrusion. As the festival night thickened around him, Ramesh noticed something else. More people than usual were pausing in front of the statue. A young couple pressed their hands together there before moving on to the main idol. Two Christian teenagers, still wearing school uniforms, lit a candle and bowed their heads. An old Hindu shopkeeper, whose daughter was in a hospital bed across the city, knelt briefly on the stone and touched Mary's feet before turning toward his own goddess. None of these gestures were grand or loud, but to a heart already tense, they felt like proof that the balance inside the temple was shifting. To him, it felt as if a guest had started to move furniture in someone else's house. By the time the main evening worship approached, the courtyard was nearly full. Lamps flickered in long rows, framing the central shrine. The air vibrated with drums and bells. Somewhere behind the smoke and colored lights stood the white figure of Mary, quiet and unarmed, carved with open hands and a faint, permanent sadness in her stone eyes. Ramesh watched from the side, and a decision he had played with only in thought now hardened inside him. In his mind he dressed that decision in language about protecting tradition, defending boundaries, cleansing the temple. Underneath all of it, something more personal was at work: fear that his God was losing ground, and that he was supposed to do something about it. While the crowd focused on the main ritual, he slipped away toward a storeroom near the back. Metal and wood clinked softly in the dim light as he moved aside folded banners and unused offerings. His hand closed around the smooth handle of a drumstick used to strike ceremonial gongs, and then around the cold weight of a maintenance hammer used to chip old cement from the steps. He told himself it would be quick. One decisive act. One broken statue. A problem removed. Outside, children laughed, fireworks crackled, and a city prepared to celebrate the victory of light over darkness. No one knew that, on this night, in this one courtyard, the line between light and darkness was about to appear in a much stranger place. Not in the sky, but between the raised hand of a priest and the unblinking eyes of a silent statue. If you're still here, you already feel where this is going. Tap like and stay to the end, because what happened when that hand finally rose is on camera, and still has no simple explanation. By the time the main ceremony began, the temple courtyard had become a moving sea of color. Oil lamps lined the stairways in careful rows, their flames tilting together whenever a gust of warm night air slipped between the pillars. Drums rolled like distant thunder, bells rang in sharp, bright bursts, and the chant of ancient Sanskrit verses washed over concrete, glass, and steel from the nearby city like a tide pressing in from another age. Ramesh moved through that tide as if on a separate track of time. The heavy drumstick and the small hammer were hidden beneath his shawl, pressing against his ribs with every step. No one questioned him as he approached the alcove that held the Virgin statue. He was, after all, part of the temple itself. People simply shifted aside when they saw him coming, heads still turned toward the central shrine where flames leapt in front of the goddess. The statue of Mary stood in her usual place, about the height of an adult, draped in a simple white robe with a soft blue mantle. Her hands were carved open in a gesture that could be welcome or sorrow. For years, she had watched this courtyard in silence. Now she faced a man who had finally decided that her watching would end. Ramesh stepped past the low metal rail intended to keep casual visitors from crowding the base. The few people near the alcove noticed, but no one thought it strange. Priests often approached images to adjust garlands, relight candles, or clear away spent offerings. Two Catholic women, heads covered with thin scarves, stood a few meters away, eyes closed. A young boy stared up at the statue, one hand holding his mother's sari, the other clutching a small plastic candle. The first sign that anything was wrong came not from Ramesh, but from the sound. It was the dry, ugly crack of wood against glass. He had swung the drumstick hard, straight into the protective front panel. The pane shuddered, spiderweb fractures racing across its surface before it shattered outward in a spray of shards. A few pieces clattered down the steps. Others skittered toward the feet of the praying women, who jumped back with startled cries. For a heartbeat, the courtyard paused. Drums continued somewhere behind the columns, but they seemed muffled, distant. Those close enough to see froze in disbelief. The boy gripping his mother's sari stared at the broken frame, his mouth hanging open. One of the women instinctively raised her hands, as if to shield the statue from the next blow, though she knew she could not reach it in time. Ramesh felt all of it, the sting of glass on his forearms, the collective intake of breath from the crowd, the sudden awareness that dozens of eyes were fixed on him. Part of him registered the shock, the horror on familiar faces, the phones already lifting into the air to record what was happening. Another part pushed forward, overriding the thin thread of doubt that might have pulled him back. The drumstick clattered to the side. He switched the hammer into his right hand, fingers tightening around the worn handle. The statue's face was now completely exposed. The white stone cheeks and delicate nose that had watched over small candles and hurried prayers for years seemed, in that moment, unbearably still, almost vulnerable. He focused on the eyes. If he destroyed them, he thought, the symbol would finally be gone. His arm rose. Muscles tensed along his shoulder and back. The hammer gleamed briefly in the mixture of lamplight and distant fireworks as it traced a small arc in the air. Later, witnesses would replay that movement again and again on their phones, a frame-by-frame record of an intention that never reached its target. Just before the hammer began its downward swing, something changed in the air around the alcove. People closest to it would describe it later in different ways. A sudden weight, a pressure on the chest, a feeling as if the air had thickened into water. One man said it was like walking into a room where someone had been crying, an invisible heaviness that did not come from what you saw, but from what was unseen. Ramesh felt it as resistance. His arm, which had been moving freely, slowed as though pushing against an unseen wall. Confusion flashed through his mind, but he forced the motion forward. The hammer dropped a few more centimeters. Then it stopped. His wrist, his elbow, his shoulder, all felt as if they had been locked into place. Strain surged through his muscles. Veins stood out on his neck. He tried to curse, but the word died in his throat. Somewhere behind him a child began to sob. The hammer simply hung there, inches from the statue's face, suspended in an impossible pose no normal human being could hold for long. Phones caught every second. One video, later shared millions of times, showed the hammer trembling as Ramesh's entire body shook with the effort to push it forward. The statue did not move. Her carved eyes, fixed at a gentle downward angle, seemed to look not at the hammer but through it, past the man holding it, into a place he had spent his life refusing to examine. The crowd's silence shattered. Some screamed. Others shouted for security. A middle-aged man in a business shirt rushed toward the railing as if to tackle Ramesh, then stopped abruptly just short of the broken glass, as if something rooted his feet to the ground. He stood there, hands half-raised, mouth open, unable to cross the last step. Behind him, the Catholic women dropped to their knees. Words spilled from their lips in a language that only a fraction of those present understood, but the meaning was clear enough. They were begging for mercy, for protection, for some invisible hand to finish what it had started and stop the blow completely. In the central shrine, the main priest's chant faltered. Drums slowed, then died. One by one, heads turned away from the goddess to the side alcove where a different kind of drama now held the night hostage. Fireworks still burst over the city, but here, in this corner of Kember, no one looked up. Ramesh's thoughts, which had been so clear and sharp when he entered the courtyard, blurred under a wave of something he could not name. It was not simply fear. It was exposure. Standing there with his arm frozen and the eyes of hundreds pressing into his back, he suddenly felt as if every motive, every secret resentment he had carefully dressed in religious language, lay naked before a presence that could not be fooled. He tried to pull his arm back. It did not move. He tried to let the hammer fall. His fingers, so eager to lift it moments ago, now would not release their grip. It was as if his own body had been turned into a kind of confession, caught between intention and consequence, unable to pretend there was any distance between the two. Around him, people whispered possibilities: witchcraft, possession, divine punishment. Someone muttered that the goddess herself was defending the temple from his rashness. Another insisted that the Virgin was protecting her image. Explanations flew like sparks from a firework, but no one could deny one hard fact. Physics itself seemed to have paused at the edge of the statue. Seconds stretched into long, unbearable moments. The hammer shook. Sweat ran down Ramesh's face. The Virgin Mary, carved decades ago and carried up this hill by grateful hands, simply went on standing, her expression unchanged. Yet the space between stone and steel had become the thinnest line in the world, the exact place where something or someone had decided this attack would not go any further. If you've watched this far, you've seen the moment everything should have shattered, and didn't. Hit like if you want to see what the cameras caught in the seconds after that impossible pause. The moment Ramesh's arm froze should have been the end of the story. A priest pauses, a crowd gasps, and someone rushes in to drag him away. That is what normally happens when a man is caught in the act of vandalizing a sacred image. But nothing that followed this first impossibility obeyed the rules that people expected from a normal night in a normal temple. For a few long seconds, the entire courtyard held its breath. The only sound was the faint hiss of oil lamps and the distant pop of fireworks from other neighborhoods. Then small noises began to slip back in, a child whimpering, beads of a rosary clicking together in shaking fingers, the scuff of shoes as people edged either closer or further away. No one knew which direction was safer, toward the scene or away from it. At the edge of the alcove, a young office worker named Ajay instinctively did what his generation does whenever something unbelievable happens. He raised his phone. His hands were not steady. The video he would later upload to half the world wobbled and pulsed as the camera struggled to focus in the uneven lighting. But it caught everything that mattered: the hammer in mid-air, the strain on Ramesh's face, and what appeared to happen next. The light did not fall from the sky like in old paintings. It did not arrive as a beam from above. Instead, it seemed to push outward from within the statue itself. At first it was only a faint bluish glow along the folds of the marble robe, almost like the reflection of a passing flashlight. Then it intensified, as if someone had lit a hidden lamp inside the stone and slowly turned a dimmer switch. Witnesses later argued about its color. Some swore it was white like hospital lights, cold and clean. Others insisted it held a hint of blue, like the early dawn before sunrise. What they agreed on was this: for a brief moment, the alcove around the statue was brighter than the main shrine, even though no electrical spotlight was pointed in that direction. The goddess, decked in gold and flowers, seemed suddenly less vivid than the simple, wounded figure in white. As the light grew, Ramesh's struggle grew with it. His jaw clenched. The tendons in his neck stood out. A drop of sweat ran down his temple and disappeared into his collar. He stared at the face he had meant to shatter, and something in his expression shifted from anger to something closer to fear, then to raw, naked shock. Those standing closest swore that at that exact instant, the statue's eyes changed. They had been carved in the usual way, lids slightly lowered, pupils suggested only by shallow indentations, gaze fixed somewhere beyond the viewer. Now they seemed to lift. No mechanical motion, no visible crack in the stone, just the uncanny sensation that the focus of those eyes had moved from nowhere in particular to one point in front of them. A middle-aged woman in a faded blue sari later described it like this: "It was as if a photograph suddenly became a person. The shape was the same, but the presence was different." AJ's video, when slowed down later, would not show literal movement. What it did show was stranger: the reflection patterns on the stone changing in a way that suggested a new direction of attention, like a person turning their head without actually turning. Then came the tears. At first, people thought it was a glitch of the light on the marble. A reddish shimmer appeared at the inner corner of one carved eye, then the other. It could have been a trick of color from a nearby garland, or a reflection from some stray firecracker outside. But the shimmer thickened, gathered, and began to move downward in a thin, unmistakable line. The red liquid traced the same path tears would follow on a human face, clinging to the smooth surface of the cheek before breaking into a slow bead that traveled toward the jaw. Another formed and followed. The glow from within the statue made each droplet catch the light, turning what could have been dismissed as a stain into something that looked disturbingly alive. Gasps rippled through the crowd in waves. Some people pushed backward, horror on their faces. Others surged forward, drawn as if by a magnet. One man reached for the railing and missed, falling to his knees instead. A little girl, perched on her father's hip, buried her face in his shoulder, then peeked again a second later, too afraid to look and too captivated to turn away. Ajay, still filming, whispered a single word under his breath. The phone's microphone picked it up, a soft, incredulous no that would later be played over and over as viewers around the world watched what followed. The lens stayed on the statue, zoomed in enough that every new streak of red was recorded, but wide enough to show the outline of Ramesh's frozen body beside it, arm locked, hammer trapped in its unfinished path. At ground level, the tears did more than run. They fell. Tiny drops reached the base of the statue, splashing on the marble edge and on a few shards of broken glass. Someone near the front, unable to restrain himself, reached out and touched a fresh streak with 2 fingers. When he pulled them back, they were stained red. He stared at his hand as if it belonged to another person, then began to tremble. Later, samples would be taken and tested. For now, all that mattered was what people saw and smelled. Several in the front row would swear that the odor was metallic, sharp, and familiar, the smell of blood, not paint. Others insisted it must be colored water or some kind of chemical trick. But no one could explain how liquid seemed to appear out of solid stone at precisely the moment a weapon was raised. Somewhere behind the crowd, a police siren wailed closer. It had been called when the first glass shattered. Officers pushed through the entrance gate just as the last of the obvious light began to fade, leaving a softer glow, more manageable but still uncanny, clinging to the folds of the statue's robe. To them, it looked like arriving at the end of a fireworks show. Smoke in the air, faces lit by screens, everyone pointing to a sky that had just gone dark. They saw Ramesh first, arm finally released, body sagging, the hammer lying on the ground at his feet. His eyes were wet, though no one could say whether from physical strain or from something else entirely. When one officer barked an order for him to step back, he did so without resistance, gaze locked on the streaks still marking the statue's cheeks. The officers wanted to clear the area, but every instinct told the crowd to stay. You do not walk away from a story while it is still being written. People pressed their phones higher, trying to capture the red trails before they dried. They knew, each in their own way, that by morning half the city would argue about what had happened here. Some would say nothing unusual occurred. Others would call it the first open miracle of a century. Evidence captured tonight would be ammunition in every argument. Ajay finally lowered his phone, hands numb, heart pounding against his ribs. He had started recording out of habit, out of curiosity, out of the desire to have something to show his friends later. Now, as he looked at the frozen image on his screen, a statue with wet, red lines down its face and a man who had wanted to destroy it reduced to silence, he realized he would be replaying this moment not just for others, but for himself again and again, searching for one thing the video could never fully give him, a way to decide whether he had just witnessed a staged drama, a rare coincidence, or the first sign that someone beyond the courtyard had finally decided to intervene. If you think a video could settle what really happened here, wait until you see how the police, the scientists, and even the priest himself tried, and failed, to agree on what those red streaks meant. Hit like if you're ready to follow this all the way to the investigations. By the time the first police car screeched to a stop outside the temple gate, the night had split into 2 versions of itself. There was the festival, still visible at the edges, fireworks blooming over rooftops, distant laughter, vendors shouting about sweets and tea. And there was the courtyard, where those sounds arrived muffled, as if crossing a border into a place where something else had taken control of the story. Officers pushed their way through the crowd, hands outstretched, voices raised in practiced commands. They had been called for vandalism, maybe a riot, maybe a fight between religious groups. None of them were prepared for what they actually saw: a statue streaked with red, a field of broken glass glittering like ice around its base, and a priest who looked less like an attacker and more like a man who had just woken up at the scene of his own nightmare. The ranking officer, a woman used to dealing with festival chaos and neighborhood disputes, halted in front of the alcove. Training told her to secure the weapon, secure the suspect, and secure the scene. Her eyes took in the hammer on the ground, the pale, shaking hands of Ramesh, and the phones held high in every direction. Then they rose to the statue's face. Red lines still marked the cheeks. Not as wet as before, but not dried either. They sat on the stone like fresh paint, too precise to be the result of some random splatter, too localized to blame on a bottle or balloon. She felt a faint metallic smell in the air, one she had encountered in alleys and accident sites, but never in front of a carved figure on a festival night. "Step back," she ordered, not entirely sure whether she was speaking to the crowd, to Ramesh, or to something she could not see. To her surprise, they obeyed. People shuffled away just far enough to create a ring of space around the statue, though no one was willing to leave the courtyard. You do not walk out of a room when the ceiling has just cracked but not yet collapsed. Ramesh allowed himself to be guided to the side. His legs moved, but his eyes kept returning to the alcove as if drawn by a magnet. He did not resist when they took his name, asked his position, or noted the hammer. The few words he managed to speak came out flat, like someone describing a dream they have not fully decided to believe or deny. Inside the newly created circle, an officer in gloves crouched near the base of the statue. He dipped a sterile cotton swab into one of the red streaks that had pooled near a shard of glass. When he lifted it, the tip was stained a deep, dark crimson. He slipped it into a small evidence tube, sealed it, and labeled it with a shaky hand. His training told him to treat this like any other suspicious substance. His body told him he had just taken a sample of something that did not fit any form he had ever filled. At the same time, temple volunteers tried to bring order to the human side of the chaos. They urged parents to carry children outside if they were frightened, asked the elderly to sit along the walls, and begged the loudest voices to lower their volume. Some listened. Others were too overwhelmed to hear anything but their own breathing. At the back of the courtyard, a few people started to argue. One man shouted about staged miracles and attention-seeking. Another accused him of insulting what everyone could clearly see. The officer in charge stepped between them faster than usual, not because the argument was particularly fierce, but because she sensed how thin the line was between awe and anger. One wrong word, and the same crowd that had fallen silent for the statue might explode at each other. While humans wrestled with interpretation, the statue did nothing. The faint inner glow that had stunned the first witnesses had now faded to something less dramatic, a gentle halo effect caused by the mixture of lamplight and phone screens. To anyone arriving late, it might have looked like nothing more than a damaged image in the wrong place at the wrong time. Only those who had seen the first burst of light could feel the difference between ordinary and after. Soon, someone from the local forensic team arrived, carrying a case that looked out of place among garlands and incense burners. He set up a portable camera on a tripod and took high-resolution shots from every angle. The broken frame, the streaks, the drops on the base, the exact position of the hammer. He asked that everyone hold still for a moment. Ironically, this was the first request of the evening that the entire crowd fulfilled perfectly. Meanwhile, Ajay and dozens of others refreshed their social media feeds in real time. The videos were already spreading beyond the neighborhood. Reposted clips had begun to attract comments from people who lived hours away. Some typed from other parts of India, others from different continents, watching the scene unfold through the same shaky frames that had captured the frozen hammer and the first tear. Patterns emerged online almost immediately. The first camp declared it proof, a sign, a judgment, a warning. The second camp insisted on hoax, illusion, or mass hysteria. A third camp, quieter but perhaps more honest, simply said, "I don't know what this is, but I can't stop watching." Back in the courtyard, officials made a practical decision. They would not attempt to clean the statue yet. They would not move it, repaint it, or cover it. Whatever explanation eventually stuck, chemical, psychological, spiritual, would need this scene preserved as intact as possible. So they set a physical barrier a few meters out and instructed everyone that, for now, no one should touch the image again. Still, people refused to leave. They lingered at the edges of the barrier, some sitting cross-legged on the ground, others leaning against the columns. A few began to pray softly, not as a performance, but as if the sudden nearness of something beyond their control demanded an answer in the only language they knew. Ramesh watched all of this from a low bench where the police had asked him to sit. He was not handcuffed. There was no need. He had nowhere he wanted to go. In his mind, the scene replayed on a loop, the weight on his arm, the light, the eyes, the tears. He tried to recall the exact thought he'd had at the moment everything changed, but that part remained hazy, like a word on the tip of the tongue that refuses to emerge. A junior officer, not much older than some of the students in the crowd, found himself glancing between the real statue and the footage on his own phone. The two images matched. No shadow moved where a projector might be hidden. No hand appeared behind the statue to pour a hidden vial. He did not know enough about illusions to rule them out, but he knew enough about fear to recognize it in Ramesh's expression. Whatever had happened, the man who swung the hammer was not proud of it. By the time the last firework fizzled out above the city, the temple court looked less like a crime scene and more like the early stages of a pilgrimage. People sat in clusters, swapping impressions in low voices. Some compared videos. Others simply stared at the statue as if hoping it would blink again. It did not. The red streaks slowly darkened as the night air dried them. The glow settled into an ordinary mix of lamp and screen. The Virgin's carved face returned fully to its usual stillness. Only the broken glass and the quiet tension clinging to the air suggested that, a short time before, something had moved in a way stone is not supposed to move, and a hand determined to destroy had discovered a limit it didn't know existed. If you've stayed with this story this far, you know we're past the point of easy explanations. Tap like and stay close, because when the samples reach the lab and the videos hit national news, the debate over what really happened here becomes louder than the festival itself. The morning after the festival night arrived gray and humid, the kind of Mumbai morning where the sky and the earth seemed to hold their breath together. By the time most of the city had woken, the temple courtyard had already filled again, not with the loud celebration of the previous evening, but with a quieter, more intense kind of gathering. Cameras, notepads, and voices asking sharp questions replaced garlands and fireworks. The forensic team returned first, expanding their workspace and setting up equipment that looked out of place among incense holders and stone gods. They did not touch the statue. Not yet. First, they needed to document everything. The angle of light at different times of day, the texture of the marble, the exact composition of the broken glass still scattered across the base. One technician knelt and photographed the remains of a single candle whose wax had hardened into a lopsided puddle, frozen mid-drip as if it, too, had paused in shock. Behind the barrier, a small crowd of regulars had already claimed their positions. Some had been there since dawn. A few claimed they had never left. Among them were the two Catholic women who had witnessed the first blow, a young Hindu man who swore he felt the air change before the light appeared, and Ajay, the office worker whose phone had captured what might become the most replayed 7 seconds of footage in the city's recent memory. They did not speak much to one another. They simply stood, or sat on folding chairs someone had brought, eyes fixed on the alcove as if the statue might still decide to do something worth recording. The truth was simpler. They had nowhere else their minds could be. The outside world, work, family, errands, felt distant and unimportant compared to the unresolved question hanging in the air. What, exactly, had they seen? The samples taken the night before had been rushed to a private lab used by the city police. By mid-morning, a preliminary report arrived. It described the substance as organic, consistent with human or animal blood, but contaminated by exposure to stone dust, candle wax, and residual oils from flowers placed near the statue. The report did not, and could not, explain where the blood had come from. No wounds were visible on the marble. No hidden cavity was detected during the initial scan. The fluid had appeared, stained the surface, and then stopped, leaving only chemistry and no clear source. The head investigator, a man who had spent 20 years examining crime scenes and accident sites, read the report twice. His training told him there had to be a rational sequence of events. Someone placed the liquid there in advance, or it leaked from a concealed mechanism triggered by vibration when the glass shattered. But his eyes, which had reviewed the high-resolution photos taken from every angle, told him something else. The streaks followed the natural path tears would take on a human face. They began at the inner corners of the eyes. They curved with the cheekbones. They pooled slightly at the chin before dripping downward. A mechanism could drip. It could not cry. By noon, word had spread beyond the neighborhood. Television crews from 3 national networks requested permission to film inside the temple. The committee, already overwhelmed, granted limited access. Reporters stood at careful distances, their voices lowered as if instinctively aware that shouting would be inappropriate here. One anchor, known for her sharp skepticism, paused mid-sentence during a live report when she noticed how utterly still the crowd behind her had become. She turned, glanced at the statue, and for a brief second her professional mask slipped. She did not know what to say. Inside a nearby cafe, a group of students debated what they had seen online. Half believed it was staged, a publicity stunt to attract pilgrims and donations. The other half insisted no one could fake the look on Ramesh's face, the genuine paralysis captured from multiple angles. A third student, quieter than the rest, simply asked, "But why would he fake being stopped? If it was a setup, wouldn't he want to look like a hero, not a fool?" No one answered. At the same time, religious leaders from different communities began to arrive at the temple, not by coordination, but by a shared sense that silence from their side might be taken as either endorsement or dismissal. A Catholic bishop came with 2 priests, moving slowly through the courtyard and pausing in front of the statue. They did not perform any public ritual. They simply stood, looking at the face they recognized from 1,000 churches, now marked by streaks that had already become the subject of 100 theories. A Hindu scholar, respected for his knowledge of temple rituals and iconography, was invited by the committee to offer his perspective. He examined the alcove carefully, asked about the history of the statue, and then said something that many found more unsettling than comforting. In our tradition, an image becomes more than stone when it is consecrated and when devotion surrounds it. I cannot say what happened here, but I can say this is not the first time an object touched by faith has behaved in ways we do not expect. That statement, meant to calm, instead deepened the divide. Some took it as confirmation that something sacred had occurred. Others heard it as an admission that religion dealt in mysteries it could not prove. The gap between those 2 interpretations was wide enough to swallow entire belief systems. By late afternoon, the statue had been examined, photographed, measured, and debated by more people in one day than it had seen in years of quiet service. Yet it remained unchanged. The red streaks had darkened but not disappeared. The marble surface showed no cracks, no hidden seams, no trace of the mechanical trickery skeptics hoped to find. Ramesh, who had spent the night in custody and the morning answering questions, was released pending further investigation. He did not return to the temple. He went home, locked the door, and sat in the corner of his small room staring at his hands. Those hands had held the hammer. Those hands had been stopped. He could still feel the pressure, not painful but absolute, like trying to push through a wall that had no visible surface. He thought about calling someone, a friend, a family member, maybe even a priest. But what would he say? That he had tried to destroy a statue and something stopped him? That he had felt, for a fleeting moment, as if he were being seen by eyes that knew not just what he was doing, but why? That the worst part was not the failure, but the realization that he had no idea what he actually believed anymore? His phone buzzed with messages. Most were angry. Some were supportive. A few were from journalists offering money for an exclusive interview. He ignored them all. Outside his window, the city moved on. Buses honked, vendors shouted, children laughed on their way home from school. Life continued as if nothing had changed. But inside the temple courtyard, even as the forensic team packed up their equipment and the news crews loaded their vans, a different kind of time had settled. It was the time of waiting, the time when a question has been asked but not yet answered, when evidence has been gathered but conclusions remain out of reach. The statue stood in that time, silent and patient, while the world around it scrambled to decide whether it had witnessed a warning, a wonder, or simply a very strange night that would eventually fade into rumor and doubt. Science brought tools. Faith brought prayers. But neither brought an answer everyone could accept. Hit like if you're ready to see what happened when the man who swung the hammer finally tried to explain what he felt in that frozen moment. For most people in Mumbai, the story of the temple incident lived inside a screen. They saw a frozen frame of a hammer held in mid-air, a statue with red streaks on its cheeks, and a crowd standing between flight and worship. They watched it in short bursts, on the train, in line for lunch, in the quiet minutes before sleep, then scrolled on to the next piece of noise. For Ramesh, there was no scrolling away. When he closed his eyes, he did not see the video. He saw the moment from inside it. He had always thought he knew himself. He was the kind of man who woke early, followed routines, kept tradition like a shield around his life. Even his anger had seemed predictable, triggered by headlines, fueled by a sense of duty, channeled into words and rituals. The night at the temple shattered that certainty more completely than any hammer could have shattered stone. In the small apartment where he lived alone, the echoes of the courtyard clung to the walls like smoke that refused to clear. He sat at his table with the lights off, the only glow coming from the street outside and the notification light on his phone blinking at regular intervals, a tiny heartbeat of the world's demand for comment. Messages piled up, some cursing him as a fanatic, others praising him as a defender of tradition, a few begging him to explain what he had felt when he suddenly could not move. He did not answer any of them. He was not sure there were words that would not make him look mad, or worse, guilty. Instead, he replayed the memory. The swing, the resistance, the gaze. It was the gaze that haunted him. It was not the look of an enemy about to strike back, nor the indifference he had once imagined sacred images possessed. It was something more like the way a parent looks at a child about to step into traffic, grieved, firm, unshakably intent on stopping the next step. Sleep, when it came, brought no relief. He dreamed of corridors lined with statues, each one turning its head as he passed. He dreamed of trying to chant in the temple, only to discover that his voice made no sound. He dreamed of hands, his own, reaching again for the hammer, and another hand, invisible but undeniable, closing around his wrist with a strength that was not violent but absolute. Word eventually reached him that the blood tests were inconclusive in one way and crystal clear in another. The substance from the statue was real blood, no dye, no synthetic blend, but the lab could not match it to any known sample. No wounds had been found on anyone present. No animal blood had been used in the temple that night. It was as if the drops had appeared only long enough to run down the face of the statue and declare themselves a fact no one could quite file in the right category. Local authorities kept their language careful. They spoke of unknown origins, of further analysis, of sensitivity around a place of worship. They did not use the word miracle. They did not use the word hoax. They left a blank where a conclusion should have gone, and into that blank poured the stories people needed to tell themselves to sleep at night. Some insisted the whole thing was a psychological episode. The crowd, already tense, had projected meaning onto a trick of light and a smear of red pigment. Others pointed to the videos and the lab reports and asked how synchronized hallucinations and real chemical results could be so neatly choreographed. Conversations that had once been about politics and prices began to bend, again and again, toward the question, but what about that temple video? The temple committee, under pressure from all sides, made a decision that surprised many. They would not hide the statue. They would repair the glass, clean only what was necessary, and allow people to come, look, and make up their own minds. They refused to turn the place into a tourist spectacle, But they also refused to pretend nothing had happened. Instead, they scheduled quiet hours for prayer and reflection, open to anyone willing to enter respectfully. In the first days after the incident, small groups began to arrive. Catholics clutching rosaries, Hindus with folded hands, a few Muslims who stood at the edge, watching in thoughtful silence. Some came out of curiosity. Others came because the video had stirred something they could not quite name. A sense that, if anything in the world still resisted hatred with more than words, it might be found here, between the broken glass and the repaired frame. Ajay returned as well, not just once but several times. Each time he came, he brought a different question with him. The first visit, his question was simple. Had he imagined the light? The second, he studied the statue's face, trying to decide whether it looked any different now that the streaks had been cleaned. The third time, he didn't look at the statue much at all. He looked at the faces around him, the people kneeling, the ones staring skeptically, the ones wiping quiet tears. Whatever had happened, it had rearranged something in them. Meanwhile, a priest from a nearby Catholic parish was asked to meet privately with Ramesh. It was an unusual request, and both men felt the weight of it. They sat across from each other in a small room at the back of the rectory, walls lined with worn books and a single wooden crucifix. Ramesh took a long time to speak. When he finally did, his words did not come out as a theological argument or as a confession in the formal sense. They came out as fragments of memory, the headlines he had read, the resentment he had nursed, the sense of righteousness that had felt so clean before he picked up the hammer and so hollow afterward. He did not describe the light in poetic terms. He simply said that when it came, he knew, with a certainty he had never felt even in his most devout moments, that what he was about to do was known in a way he could not hide from. Not known by the crowd, not known by the police, but known by whatever stood on the other side of that marble gaze. The parish priest did not try to label the experience. He did not tell Ramesh that he had seen an apparition or that he had been punished by a foreign god. He simply listened and then said, in careful, measured words, that sometimes God stops a hand not because the person is hated, but because they are loved too much to be allowed to become the kind of person they are on the verge of becoming. That idea struck Ramesh harder than any argument he had heard in months. He had expected condemnation or debate. Instead, he was faced with the possibility that the force that halted his arm was not revenge, but mercy. For the statue, yes, but also for him. Outside, life continued to stir. Activists from different sides tried to pull the incident into their narratives, holding up the video as proof of everything they had already believed. But inside the quiet rooms where people actually involved in the event sat and thought, the story was less about winning and more about being confronted. The Virgin Mary statue did not move again. No new tears appeared. The video did not grow longer. It remained a short, stubborn slice of time in which a hand meant for harm could not finish its journey. Yet that slice began to act like a mirror. People who watched it saw what they had brought with them: fear, anger, hope, longing. For Ramesh, the mirror reflected a man he did not want to be anymore. He did not know what he would become instead. He only knew that whenever he closed his eyes now, the memory of that gaze pushed him away from hatred like a hand on his chest, firm and unrelenting, refusing to let him take another step in the direction he had once chosen without thinking. If this is challenging the way you see anger, faith, or even yourself, don't click away. Hit like and stay tuned, because as the story spreads beyond one courtyard, it starts changing people who weren't even there that night. In less than 48 hours, the temple incident stopped being just a neighborhood event and became a national argument. News channels replayed the same shaky clips on loop: the hammer rising, the arm stopping, the faint glow, the red tracks sliding down a marble face. Commentators sat in bright studios, far from incense and broken glass, and tried to compress an entire night of confusion into a few sharp sentences. Some called it the Mumbai miracle, though that term vanished quickly when others pointed out how easily such language could inflame tensions in a country already stretched thin by religious suspicion. Others labeled it the Kember incident, as if neutral wording could drain the fear and wonder from the frames that millions had already watched in private rooms, on crowded trains, and in the bluish half-darkness before sleep. The reactions fell into familiar patterns, but the intensity was new. There were those who said the statue had bled as a sign from God, that the Virgin had intervened to protect herself and to expose hatred at the very place where devotion should have been safest. There were those who snorted at the idea, insisting the whole scene could be reproduced with tubes and pumps and a clever lighting rig. And in between those groups, a large number of people simply felt uneasy. They wanted to believe in something, but they had seen too many fakes, too many staged outrage clips, too many manufactured miracles. Hashtags rose and fell like small tidal waves. Clips were slowed down, stabilized, color-corrected, annotated with arrows and circles. Amateur analysts traced the path of each drop of red frame by frame, attempting to prove either that gravity alone explained everything, or that gravity alone could not. Some tried to match the light flare with audio peaks, arguing that the glow must be the reflection of a nearby firework. Others pointed out that the flare lingered too long and seemed to grow, not flash. For those in the courtyard that night, the online noise felt oddly distant. Their memories were not made of pixels and compression artifacts but of temperature and smell, of the way the air had thickened, of the sound of a hammer that never landed. They remembered the press of bodies, the sudden hush, the weight on their own chests. The video showed what happened. It did not show what it felt like. Among those watching the digital storm from a distance was an elderly nun in a small convent on the other side of the city. She had spent decades in India, teaching children and visiting the sick. Arthritis now kept her from most of her former work, but it did not keep her from prayer. When she saw the clip for the first time, she did not rush to label it. She simply paused the video on the frame where the tears were most visible and whispered a simple line she had repeated in front of countless statues. "If you are speaking, let us listen." In another part of Mumbai, a young tech worker who had left his childhood faith years ago watched the same clip and felt something he did not want to name. It was not sudden belief. It was the uncomfortable realization that his tidy categories, real and fake, natural and manipulated, did not quite fit what he was seeing. He kept replaying the moment Ramesh's arm stopped. He knew about camera tricks, about staged content, about deepfakes. Yet the raw, unscripted panic on that frozen face did not look like acting. The story crossed borders. In Kerala, Christians lit extra candles before Mass, offering prayers for our brothers and sisters in Mumbai. In Delhi, a panel of secular activists cited the incident as evidence that religion still ruled people's emotions more than reason. In Rome, a few Vatican officials quietly asked for translations of the reports, slipping them alongside other dossiers on unverified phenomena that rarely saw the light of day. But the most important shifts happened in smaller, quieter ways. In homes where Hindu and Christian relatives had not spoken about faith in years without arguing, the video became a strange common ground. They could disagree on what it meant, but they could at least admit that it was disturbing to watch a human hand fail so dramatically at carrying out an act of desecration. Some viewers felt defensive. Others felt strangely comforted by the idea that unchecked violence might, at times, be stopped by something more than human courage. A few, like Ajay, felt mainly exposed. The video forced them to recognize the ease with which they had grown numb to stories of broken idols and ruined churches. This time, they had seen the moment before the damage, the instant when a line had been drawn and enforced by no visible guard. Back at the temple, the physical scene began to resume a kind of rhythm, even while the digital storm raged. A repaired glass panel was installed, stronger than before. The committee published a simple statement. The statue would remain where it was, open for veneration and scrutiny, and the temple would welcome visitors who came peacefully, no matter what they believed about what had happened. Each evening, a modest crowd gathered. Some knelt. Some filmed. Some did both. A sign near the entrance asked visitors to maintain silence, more as a practical measure than a mystical one. The story had generated enough noise on its own. Inside Ramesh's small apartment, silence had a different flavor. It was dense, almost physical. He had watched some of the news coverage, heard himself described in flat terms, the priest involved, the alleged attacker, the man at the center. None of these labels matched how he felt. He did not feel like a villain or a hero. He felt like a man who had discovered, in the most public way possible, that his anger did not have the last word over his actions. He knew that sooner or later, someone would ask him to speak in front of a camera. He also knew that whatever he said would be picked apart, quoted out of context, made to support positions he was no longer sure he held. For the first time in years, he found himself drawn not to the loudest voices in the public square, but to the quiet ones who simply said, "We do not know, but we cannot ignore this." If this story has followed you beyond the screen, into your own questions, your own memories, hit like and stay with it. Because the way it ends says less about statues and more about what kind of people we choose to become after we've seen too much to pretend nothing happened. By late November 2025, the city's attention had begun to drift, as it always does. New scandals, new crises, new arguments rose up to claim headlines and notifications. The viral wave around the Kember Temple broke and rolled back, leaving behind only smaller ripples. A few dedicated followers, a handful of critics who refused to let the subject go, and a quiet, persistent core of people who had been there that night and who, whether they liked it or not, had been changed. The temple courtyard settled into a new pattern. On most evenings, life looked almost ordinary. Devotees came to honor the main goddess with lamps and offerings. Children tugged at their parents, impatient to go home and eat. Vendors outside called out the prices of snacks. The Virgin Mary statue kept her place in the side alcove, neither hidden nor promoted, framed now by unbroken glass and a slightly thicker layer of caution in the eyes of those who passed. Yet underneath that ordinariness ran a new current. People who might once have walked past the alcove without a second glance now slowed, even if only for a heartbeat. Some made a small sign of respect, not necessarily out of belief in Mary, but out of acknowledgement, this is where something happened. Others turned their faces away, disturbed by the idea that stone might not behave exactly as stone should. Ajay kept the original file on his phone, though he had downloaded many copies elsewhere. Sometimes, on the train home after long days at work, he would play it in silence. He knew every frame now. The swing, the stall, the redness blooming at the eyes. The more he watched it, the less it served as proof of anything and the more it functioned as a mirror. On some days, he saw manipulation. On others, he saw mercy. On his most honest days, he saw his own hunger to know whether the world was as sealed and indifferent as he had told himself it was. The two Catholic women from the courtyard continued to come by regularly. They never called the event a miracle in public. When asked, they simply said they had seen enough to take their own prayers more seriously. The Hindu shopkeeper whose daughter lay in a hospital and who had knelt by the statue before the incident noticed something about himself. He no longer felt alone in his fear. Whether or not the tears were supernatural mattered less to him than the sense that heaven, however one named it, had not simply watched his pain from a distance. And Ramesh, the man whose hand had started everything, found that his life had split into a before and an after. Before, he had known exactly what to say in religious debates. After, he found himself less willing to speak at all. He continued his duties where he could, but something in his approach changed. The anger that had once driven his sermons thinned, replaced by a hesitant humility that some found disorienting and others found overdue. He never stood in front of a camera to tell his story. When reporters came to his door, he answered politely but briefly. Yes, he had intended to damage the statue. Yes, he had felt something stop him. No, he did not know what it was. He would not sign any statement turning the event into a weapon against another community, nor would he join groups claiming it proved nothing except mass delusion. In quiet moments, he would return in his mind to the instant of resistance. The most terrifying part, he realized, was not that his arm had been held still, but that in that stillness he had felt utterly known. not exposed for public shaming, but seen in a way that made pretending impossible. If that gaze had been only judgment, he might have collapsed under it. But there had been something else in it. Sorrow, perhaps, and an unwillingness to let him cross a line he would never uncross. The world moved on. But in countless small ways, the story refused to die. A nurse in another part of the city, who had been drifting away from her childhood faith, found herself praying briefly before starting her shift, thinking of a statue that seemed to weep in front of a man who wanted to break her. A young man in yet another neighborhood, who had nurtured a growing contempt for all religion, felt an unexpected chill when he watched the clip and imagined himself holding the hammer. For some, the incident became a cautionary tale about how quickly stories could be exaggerated, how eager people were to baptize coincidence as miracle. For others, it became one of those quiet markers in history that do not change laws or borders but slide into the deeper layers of a culture's memory. A reminder that sometimes hatred does not get to finish its sentence. The narrator of this story cannot offer a label that will satisfy everyone. There are no signed statements from heaven, no footnotes from angels explaining what the light was or why the tears dried when they did. There is only an intersection of facts and interpretations. A priest's arm that stopped, a statue's face streaked red, a crowd that watched, a world that argued. What remains, when the echo fades and the headlines roll on, is not a perfect explanation but a set of questions that settle into the heart like seeds. What if the line between desecration and restraint is thinner than we think? What if the things we are about to destroy, out of fear, pride, or wounded identity, are sometimes shielded by a hand we cannot see, not just for their sake, but for ours? And what if the real miracle is not that stone might weep, but that human beings, even after witnessing more violence than any generation before them, still stop, if only for a moment, when they see a hand raised to strike and realize that this time, at least, it did not land? If this story stayed with you past the shock, into the questions, the doubts, maybe even the hope, share it with one person who needs to remember that hate doesn't always get the last move. And if you want mais historias reis que fazem você pensa on testa julgar, inscreva-se e fique com a gente.